Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a man who didn't have very much. Not much money, hardly any food. He really had very little, and he traveled from village to village trying to find the scraps that he could get hold of, even just that day. And he found himself in a small village one day. There was kind of magic in the air that day. Maybe it was because the river was flowing through this village, and let's be honest, the sound of a gushing river just made him feel good. It usually makes us feel good. He knocked on a few doors and asked if anyone had anything to spare, but they all turned him away, cold, shut the door. "We have nothing for you," they said. So he wandered around the streets and he found himself on the bridge over the river. And he looked down at the gushing, flowing waters. The sound was loud in his ears. It sent him almost into a trance, still calm as he watched the water flow. And then suddenly he had an idea. He ran off the bridge, not off the bridge, that would be a different story. He ran along the bridge, down off the exit and down some stairs, which took him right to the banks of the river. And there he put his hands gently in the water and washed his face and took from the water one small stone, gray, with a white ring around it. He rubbed it dry on his clothes and put it in his pocket. And then, jolly as ever, he bumbled his way back up to the village and found somewhere on the side of the road just a small piece of fabric. It wasn't the cleanest, but he kind of tried to dust it off and fold it up nicely to protect his stone. And then he knocked on a door. And the door creaked open. And this woman looked back at him and said, "What do you want? I've got nothing for you." "By contrary, I would like to offer you," he said, "to make the most delicious, nutritious, magical stone soup. It's really one of a kind." She'd never heard of stone soup before, but the idea of someone cooking for her for a change, well, that sounded quite nice, actually. She was the one cooking every day. And I don't know if it was the good weather that day or something in the goodness of her heart, but she welcomed him in. She gave him a pot and they filled it with water, set it to boil. He plopped in this stone and started to stir. And then he turned to the woman and said, "You know what? You know what would make the soup just that little bit better? You don't have a few onions, do you?" "Well, as a matter of fact, I do," she said. And she, quick as ever, diced them up really small, plopped them in the pan, in a big pot, and they stirred, and then they started to be pierced by the smell of the onions we all know and maybe love. And they waited and they waited. He said, "You know what? The soup's looking great. But what would make it just like a little even better? Don't have any carrots, do you?" And she said, "Carrots? No, I don't, but maybe my neighbor does." And so she bumbled across next door to the neighbor and knocked on the door and told her all about the stranger who was making this delicious soup. And of course she had carrots, and could she come and watch the magic take place? Why, yes. And so they gathered around, they cut up the carrots into circle slices. I don't know, how would you call it? Circle slices. I'm sure there's a cooking name for that, but I don't know what it is. If someone wants to write in the chat, they can. And they plopped it into this. They plopped it into the pot, and they stirred and they stirred and they stirred. And I'm sure you can guess what happened next. A few minutes later, he said, "What would make it even better? Even better than the carrot discs that have been added." Thank you, Christy Pace. what do you think they might have added next in the soup, if anyone wants to write? I wonder, could it have been celery? Could it have been parsnips? No, it was potatoes. That's what the next neighbor brought. And then someone brought turnips and basil and then salt and pepper, of course. And suddenly it was filled with all kinds of spices like cumin, and then someone threw in some mushrooms, and it was just smelling delicious. And by this point, everyone's stomachs were rumbling mightily, just in time to take the ladle and pour it into each bowl. Listen to the sound of everyone slurping. Afterwards, some stories were told, some songs were sung, bellies were filled, and there was a comfort in the air. One by one, each person went back to their home, washing the dishes, taking it with them. And the man started to wash his stone with such tender care. Just as he was wrapping it back up in that piece of fabric that he'd found, the woman asked if he would consider selling it. And you might wonder how I came to have this stone with the white ring all around it. Came from the banks of the river and was passed and on and on and on. But that, my friends, is another story for another time. And I would like to bless this next part of this wonderful co-creation, this stone soup that has been happening all day and continues to happen with lots of delicious flavor, heart, soul connection, and may it be delicious and satisfying for us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Woohoo. We celebrate.